It was too powerful for its own good. The 1967 Corvette L88 wasn't built to be driven. It was built to dominate. Aluminum heads, 12.5 to 1 compression, 560 horsepower before the government even admitted it existed. It was so brutal, so fast, that Chevrolet tried to hide it from the public. Dealers swapped the engines out, afraid customers couldn't handle it. In their fear, they killed one of the greatest machines America ever made. They called it smart business, but some say that was the day America stopped building monsters. The day we decided to tame power instead of wield it. 1966. Warren, Michigan. General Motors Technical Center. America was at its peak. We'd put satellites in orbit, built highways coast to coast, won a war. We believed, genuinely believed, that American engineering could solve any problem, that there were no limits we couldn't push. The Corvette was America's sports car. But it had a problem. Ferrari, Porsche, Jaguar. European manufacturers built cars that won races, cars that made Americans look slow. GM's executives didn't like that. Neither did their engineers. Zora Arkus-Duntov was Corvette's chief engineer, born in Belgium, raised in Russia, educated in Germany. But he understood America better than most Americans. He understood that this country respected power, raw, unfiltered, overwhelming power. Duntov had a vision. Build a Corvette so fast, so capable, that Ferrari would have nightmares. Not a street car pretending to be a race car pretending to be street legal. The project started in secret, not because it was classified, because GM's executives would have stopped it if they'd known what Duntov was building. He was creating something that violated every principle of safe, responsible automotive design. The engine designation was L88, a 427 cubic inch big block V8. But calling it a 427 was like calling a nuclear reactor a furnace. They shared some parts. They weren't the same thing. Start with the block. Cast iron, reinforced, built to withstand pressures that would crack standard blocks. Then the heads, not cast iron, aluminum, lighter, better heat dissipation, more airflow. The kind of heads you put on race cars when weight matters and cost doesn't. 12.5 to 1 compression ratio. That number meant nothing to most people. To engineers, it meant the engine would detonate pump gas like a grenade. You couldn't run this engine on 93 octane. You couldn't run it on premium. You needed 103 octane racing fuel, the kind you bought at tracks, not gas stations. The camshaft was radical, aggressive timing, massive overlap. The engine idled like it was angry, like it was waiting for permission to destroy something. Solid lifters, not hydraulic, solid, which meant noise, which meant maintenance, which meant this engine announced itself. You heard it coming from blocks away. The carburetor was a single Holly 4-barrel, but it was mounted on an aluminum intake manifold designed for maximum flow. Every component was optimized for one thing: power, not comfort, not reliability, not fuel economy, power. When Chevrolet Dyno tested the L88, the numbers were terrifying. 560 horsepower at 6,400 RPM, over 500 pound-feet of torque at 4,000 RPM. These weren't impressive numbers. These were dangerous numbers. This was 1967. Most family sedans made 150 horsepower. Performance cars made 300. 400 was exotic. 560 was insanity. But here's what made the L88 truly special. That 560 number was real, not advertising, not exaggeration, actual output. Most manufacturers in the 1960s played games with horsepower ratings. They'd test engines with no accessories, with open headers, with optimal conditions that bore no relationship to how the engine performed in an actual car. The numbers were fantasy. Duntov didn't play those games. The L88 made 560 horsepower the way it came in the car, with accessories, with restrictive exhaust, with real-world conditions. And Chevrolet was terrified of that number, because 560 horsepower in 1967 meant lawsuits, insurance companies refusing coverage, dealers afraid to stock the cars, customers killing themselves, federal regulators asking uncomfortable questions. So Chevrolet lied, officially, deliberately. The L88 was rated at 430 horsepower. That number appeared in brochures, in advertising, in official documentation. 430 was already intimidating. It was the highest-rated engine you could get in a 1967 Corvette. But it wasn't the truth. The truth was 130 horsepower higher. The truth was a number that would have made this car illegal to insure in most states. The price for this engine was outrageous. The L88 option cost $947.90. That was on top of the base Corvette price of $4,388. You were paying almost $1,000 extra for an engine that Chevrolet was actively trying to discourage you from buying. And they made it difficult. You couldn't just check a box on the order form and get an L88. You had to specifically request it. You had to sign paperwork acknowledging that this car required racing fuel, that it was loud, that it was uncomfortable, that it was not designed for street use. Chevrolet buried the option in fine print, didn't advertise it, didn't promote it, hoped that only serious racers would find it. They succeeded. In 1967, only 20 L88 Corvettes were built. 20. Out of over 22,000 Corvettes produced that year. 20 customers who knew what they wanted, who understood what they were buying, who were willing to deal with an engine that idled rough, overheated in traffic, and required constant maintenance. 20 people who wanted a race car they could theoretically drive on the street. Even though doing so was miserable, those 20 cars represented the peak of American automotive ambition. The moment when engineers built something because they could, because the limits existed to be pushed, because power mattered more than practicality. But America was changing, and the L88 was about to become a victim of that change. 1967. Chevrolet dealerships across America. The L88 Corvettes started arriving. Dealers unpacked them, started them up, and immediately knew they had a problem. The engine was loud. Not performance car loud, race car loud. The solid lifters clattered. The exhaust bellowed. You couldn't have a conversation with this engine idling. It overheated sitting still. The cooling system was adequate for racing, for moving at high speed with air flowing through the radiator. But in traffic, in a parking lot, the temperature gauge climbed. Steam hissed. The engine threatened to destroy itself. It required racing fuel, 103 octane. That meant the owner couldn't just stop at any gas station. They needed access to racing fuel. They needed to plan trips around where they could refuel. They needed to carry fuel cans for emergencies. And it was uncomfortable. The camshaft profile that made power at high RPM made the engine lumpy and unresponsive at low speed. Stop-and-go driving was painful. The car bucked, stuttered, behaved like it was actively protesting being driven slowly. Mechanics looked at these cars and saw nightmares. This wasn't an engine you maintained with normal tools and normal procedures. This required expertise. This required someone who understood racing engines. Most dealership mechanics didn't. Sales staff tried to sell these cars, walked potential customers around them, started them up, watched the customer's face change from excitement to concern when they heard the engine, watched them walk away when they learned about the fuel requirements. The L88 Corvettes sat on showroom floors. Weeks became months. These were expensive cars taking up space, tying up capital, making no money, and dealers started getting nervous because they had invested in these cars, paid for them, needed to move them. But the market for a car this extreme was smaller than anyone had anticipated. So they made a decision, a practical decision, a business decision, a decision that would later be recognized as one of the greatest automotive mistakes in history. They would swap the engines, remove the L88, the 427 cubic inch aluminum head race motor that was too loud, too hot, too demanding for civilian use. Install a standard 427, the L36, still powerful, 400 horsepower, but manageable, practical, something a normal person could live with. This wasn't complicated. Both engines were based on the same block architecture. The motor mounts were identical. The transmissions bolted up the same way. You could pull an L88 and install an L36 in a few hours. The financial logic was simple. The L88 had cost the dealer an extra $947, but it was making the car unsellable. A Corvette with an L36 engine sold quickly. People wanted them. People could use them. Swap the engine. Sell the car. Maybe keep the L88 engine. Maybe sell it separately to a racer who actually wanted it. Maybe just store it. It made sense. Perfect business sense. Take the extreme engine that was scaring customers away. Replace it with a good engine that customers actually wanted. Sell the car, move the inventory, make money. And so they did it. Exactly how many times this happened isn't documented. Engine swaps weren't recorded officially. Dealers didn't advertise that they'd modified the cars. There's no database tracking which L88 Corvettes left the factory and which still have their original engines. But it happened, multiple times. Documented cases exist of L88 Corvettes that were sold new with different engines. Of original L88 engines showing up decades later in someone's garage or workshop. Of owners discovering that their original L88 Corvette had been modified before the first owner ever drove it. The dealers thought they were solving a problem, making these cars practical, making them sellable, doing what businesses do, adapting products to market reality. They had no way of knowing what they were destroying. Because in 1967, nobody was thinking about collector value. Nobody imagined that 50 years later, an original L88 Corvette would be worth $3 million. That the engine they were pulling out and setting aside was worth more than most people's houses. They saw a mechanical component that was causing problems. They removed it. They installed something better suited to the customer's needs. They sold the car. They moved on. They saved the dealer roughly $950 per car. The difference between what they'd paid for the L88 option and what they could get by selling it separately or using it elsewhere. $950 in 1967 money. About $8,000 today. And what did that $950 savings cost? Today, an original matching numbers 1967 L88 Corvette sells for $2.5 to $3.5 million, sometimes more, depending on history and condition. A 1967 Corvette with a standard big block, $150,000 to $200,000. The difference, $3 million. $3 million destroyed to save $950. But it wasn't really about the money. Not the money they saved. Not the money they lost. Those dealers couldn't have known. They were making rational decisions with the information available. What they destroyed was something deeper. They destroyed the machine at the moment of its creation, before it could prove what it was, before it could win races, before it could build a reputation, before anyone could understand what Duntov and his team had created. They neutered America's most powerful production car because they were afraid of it, because customers were afraid of it, because it was too extreme, too uncompromising, too honest about what it was. And in doing that, they participated in something larger than they understood. The taming of American automotive ambition. The moment when practical concerns began overriding performance aspirations. When fear of liability became more important than the pursuit of excellence. 1967 was the peak. The moment when American manufacturers would build anything. When engineers pushed limits because limits existed to be pushed. When 560 horsepower was considered a reasonable amount of power to put in a streetcar. But it was also the beginning of the end. The moment when regulations started tightening. When insurance companies began restricting high-performance cars. When safety advocates started questioning whether manufacturers should build machines this dangerous. The dealers swapping L88 engines didn't cause that shift, but they symbolized it. The choice to make cars safer, more practical, more acceptable to average buyers, at the cost of everything that made them special. The 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, collectors started paying attention to L88 Corvettes, not because they were practical, but precisely because they weren't. The market for classic Corvettes had always existed, but certain models commanded premium prices, the rarest, the most powerful, the most uncompromising, and the L88 was all of those things. Only 20 built in 1967. Only a few confirmed to still have original engines. Only a handful that could be documented with factory build sheets and matching numbers. Auction results started climbing. 100,000, 250,000, 500,000, a million, 2 million, 3 million. Each sale set records. Each discovery of an original L88 became news in the collector car world. Magazines wrote articles. Experts authenticated. Owners who'd bought these cars decades earlier for a few $1,000s suddenly owned treasures. The irony was perfect. The very characteristics that made dealers swap the engines, the noise, the difficulty, the impracticality, the demand for racing fuel, the rough idle, the overheating, all of it. Everything that made the car impossible to sell in 1967 made it priceless in 2010. Collectors weren't buying transportation. They were buying history. They were buying the peak moment of American performance before regulations killed it. They were buying a machine that represented ambition without compromise. And that machine, that representation of what America used to build, was now worth more than most businesses, more than most houses, more than anything those dealers in 1967 could have imagined. Museums acquired L88s, displayed them like art, which they were, mechanical art, the expression of engineering genius and corporate courage meeting at exactly the right moment. Vintage racing enthusiasts bought them, campaigned them, proved that Duntov's vision was correct, that these cars could dominate, that 560 horsepower in a 2,900-pound chassis was exactly the right formula for speed. And owners who had them, treasured them, understood that they owned something that couldn't be replicated. You can't build an L88 today. The regulations won't allow it. The insurance companies won't cover it. The emission standards prohibit it. The safety requirements make it impossible. You can build something with 560 horsepower. That's easy now. Modern Corvettes make more than that. Much more. 700 horsepower. 800. The numbers that seemed impossible in 1967 are routine now. But modern Corvettes make that power through technology, through computers, through forced induction and variable valve timing and direct injection and engine management systems that prevent drivers from making mistakes. The L88 made 560 horsepower through displacement and compression and airflow, through mechanical simplicity and brutal efficiency, through design that prioritized power above everything else. And that difference, that's what collectors pay millions for. Not the power, the honesty, the lack of compromise. The machine that says, this is what I am, take it or leave it, without apology. Time turned terror into treasure. The very danger that scared dealers became the source of value. What they feared then, we worship now. But we worship from a distance, behind glass, in museums, at auctions. We admire what we're no longer brave enough to build. The 1967 Corvette L88 wasn't just an engine option. It was a statement about what America believed, about what we were willing to build, about how we approached the limits of technology and performance. We built a 560 horsepower street car because we could, because the challenge existed, because Ferrari needed to be beaten, because power mattered. We didn't build it safely. We didn't build it practically. We didn't build it for everyone. We built it for the few people crazy enough to want it, the few people who understood that sometimes machines should be dangerous, that sometimes comfort is the enemy of excellence, that sometimes the right answer is more, even when more is terrifying. And then we got scared. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually. Regulations tightened. Insurance premiums increased. Lawsuits multiplied. Safety standards evolved. Emissions controls restricted engine design. The world that created the L88 disappeared, replaced by a world that prioritized safety over speed, efficiency over power, comfort over capability. And we gained things. Fewer people die in car accidents now. Cars are more reliable, more efficient, more accessible to more people. Progress happened, but something was lost. The willingness to build machines that demand respect, that require skill, that don't apologize for being difficult, that exist at the edge of what's possible rather than the center of what's safe. The dealers who swapped those engines thought they were being practical. They were right. They were being practical, making business decisions, adapting to market reality, doing what businesses do. But in their practicality, they destroyed something that can't be rebuilt. Not because the engineering is impossible. The engineering is simple. We could build an L88 today if we wanted to. Better materials, better technology, better everything. We can't build it because we're not allowed to. Because regulations prohibit it. Because insurance companies won't cover it. Because liability lawyers would destroy any company that tried. We tamed power. We made it safe. We made it manageable. We made it acceptable. And in doing that, we lost something we didn't know we'd miss until it was gone. The sound of an engine that sounds angry at idle. The feel of a car that requires strength to control. The knowledge that what you're driving could overwhelm you if you're not careful. The L88 wasn't just an engine. It was a heartbeat. American industrial might compressed into 427 cubic inches. The belief that we could build anything. That limits existed to be exceeded. That danger was acceptable if the result was great enough. And when those dealers pulled those engines, when they swapped power for practicality, maybe they pulled out a little of our own courage along with it. We used to build things that scared us, and that's why they mattered. Now we build things that comfort us, things that protect us from ourselves, things that make us feel powerful without requiring us to be powerful. The L88 sits in museums now, behind velvet ropes, worth millions, admired, photographed, respected, but not driven, not really, not the way Duntov intended, not with racing fuel and wide-open throttle, and the acceptance that this machine demands everything you have. We worship it because we remember what we used to be, when we built monsters, when we tamed nothing, when American engineering meant pushing every limit until something broke. The 1967 Corvette L88 was the peak, the moment before the decline. The last time we built something this uncompromising and called it a production car. 20 were made. Maybe half still have their original engines. Maybe fewer. The exact number doesn't matter. What matters is what they represent. The moment when we stopped. When fear overcame ambition. When we chose safety over glory. The day we swapped those engines was the day we swapped our courage for comfort. And maybe that was the day America stopped building monsters.